We're going to use AAA authentication as a more scalable solution for authenticating users when they need management access to our routers and our switches. Now, the AAA services can be provided by an external server, such as a Radius server or a TACAX Plus server, or it can be provided by the local username and password database right on the router or switch. Typically, we're going to use a combination of the two. We're going to rely on the servers, the Radius servers and TACAX Plus servers, as the primary method of authentication. If those servers are not available, then we're going to rely on the local username and password database. So it's really important that we set up our method lists appropriately when it comes to AAA authentication. What that means is that the order of the method list has to be accurate. We have to specify that the Radius servers will be utilized first, and if and only if they are not available, will the local username and password database be used. If that is not the experience or the result we are getting, then we're going to have to reconstruct the method list to make sure it is accurate to how we want authentication to occur. In addition to that, in the method list, you could provide a keyword of none. So you could specify Radius servers, local authentication, or a line authentication, or none. None does not mean deny access. None means don't bother trying to authenticate that particular user. So if you specify a value of none, and all of a sudden none is what is being processed by the method list, that means you automatically gain access without having to provide any type of authentication credential. So if users are gaining access to the device for management purposes without having to authenticate, double check to see if that none keyword has been specified. Let's analyze a AAA authentication configuration on ASW2. Look at the running config here. Show run pipe to include AAA authentication, and it is for login purposes. So logging into the lines, line console 0 or line VTY 0 through 4. That is what this particular authentication is for. So it's AAA authentication login. This is our method list for login. The method list has been given a name. We provided a name of management. So it's important that we link this to the VTY lines or the console line. Let's see if we've done that successfully. So run pipe to section line. When we analyze this output, we'll see that line console 0 is using the management method list for login authentication. The VTY lines are also using the management method list for login authentication. So we have to map this particular method list we created with the lines, as we have done here. Now, there is a default method list, so you could specify default if you wanted to, and that would just be a non-user defined method list that is default on the device, but you still have to provide the methods that are going to be utilized. However, I decided to name my particular method list management because that's what I'm using it for management purposes. The very first method we're going to use for authentication purposes is the Radius servers. And it's a group of Radius servers. Let's look at the running config. Show run. And let's see if we can identify the group of Radius servers that we have. Here it is right here. The AAA group of Radius servers is called Radius servers. Let's double check to make sure it's the right one. Radius _ servers. And we can see that output right there. Inside of this group, we have a particular server that is called management _ access. That's the name of the Radius server that we have. Let's see where that particular Radius server resides, because the configuration of that Radius server is very, very important to our authentication process. So there's a lot of information in this running config, and we typically don't want to be browsing through it like this. But we can see our Radius servers down here. Radius server management access. There's the IP address of the Radius server. There's its authentication port number. There's its accounting port number. And there's its key. It's called give me access. That's the authentication key to authenticate with the Radius server. So let's see if there's any commands here we can use for the Radius server. So show Radius. Show Radius what? I want to see the Radius server group. Radius server group, and show me all in this particular case. So you have a few Radius server groups, but here we can see there's that server group called Radius_servers. Radius_servers. And we can see that there's a server in it with 10.1.100.100, port 1645 and 1646. So it's important that we have the Radius servers specified, we have the Radius group specified, so that way there we can attach that particular Radius group to our management credentials. So let's type in now the command we looked at before, and then our lines. So the Radius servers group is going to be checked first. If that server is available, you will be providing authentication credentials to that server. If you fail, too bad, you are not going to be allowed access to the device for management purposes. However, if the Radius server is not accessible, what do I mean by not accessible? Well, it means that this switch, ASW2, cannot contact the Radius server at 10.1.100.100, then it goes and checks the local database. That's what this means, local database. What do we have in the local database? Show run, pipe to include username. We'll see in our local database we have a user named admin with a secret of this right here. So we could use this admin username and the password that goes along with it to log in if the Radius servers are not available. Now, what does the case mean after local? Because local is talking about the local username and password database, but case, that means that the username is going to be case sensitive. So not only is the password case sensitive, but now the username is case sensitive as well, just enhancing our security a little bit more for authentication purposes. So when you're troubleshooting AAA authentication, you want to double check to make sure, especially when you're using it for management access as we are here. Double check to make sure that you've applied it correctly to the lines, the correct method list, and we can see it is here. Make sure that your method list is in the right order. That you want the Radius servers checked first, and then the local username and password database. You could also add on to that line passwords if you want to, and if you really wanted to, the keyword of none, which I would not recommend, because the keyword of none would mean that if the Radius server is not available and there's no passwords in the local username and password database, then no authentication is required, and you really do not want to have no authentication required for management access. To verify your Radius servers, as you saw, show Radius server group. You can look through the running config, but make sure that you have successful connectivity to the Radius servers, so you might even want to do a ping. Ping that Radius server and make sure you can reach it from that particular device.